All right, welcome back, guys. We are going to finish up the nervous system content today. Not that much left. We just have to talk a little bit about reflexes. So let's go ahead and get into that. All right. So in regards to reflexes, we just got to talk a little bit about like what is a reflex, and then learn about some specific ones and the reflex arc. So what specifically happens when a reflex occurs? So for instance, what is a reflex? A reflex, by definition, is a rapid, predictable, and involuntary response to stimuli. Rapid because it's happening so fast that your brain typically is not involved. There are a couple of reflexes that do, but most are not. Predictable in the sense that you can repeat that reflex action over and over and over again, and you're going to get the same results. And involuntary in the sense that you don't have control of this. It happens without your control or your fruition. Now, there are two types of reflexes we need to discuss: somatic and autonomic. Those words should look familiar. Somatic, if you recall, is voluntary. So those are going to be reflexes that stimulate skeletal muscles. Autonomic is going to be reflexes that stimulate your smooth muscles, your heart, and your glands. So, for instance, the example of somatic reflexes, and these are the ones that we're focusing on primarily, might I add, would be like jerking your hand away from a hot object. Even though it seems instantaneous, where you feel the pain and you pull, the act of pulling away is actually faster than your brain perceives. So that's pretty incredible as far as how that works. Autonomic reflexes are going to be regulating things like smooth muscle, heart, and glands, like we mentioned. So, for example, salivation. You make saliva, of course, when you're eating, but you also make saliva when you think of food and smell food and even hear someone eating, right? That's all a reflex. Sweating is no different. Your internal body temperature climbs, so you need to sweat to cool off. Digestion and blood pressure, these are things that are a little bit more complex, but those are reflexes as a response to what's occurring in the body. Okay. Reflex arc. So, what are the 5 elements of a reflex arc that we need to be comfortable with? So, first of all, we have what's called the receptor. The receptor is basically the part of your body that is receiving that information, that stimulus. So, let me give you an example. You step on a Lego. On your foot, you're going to have touch receptors, which your touch receptors can help you perceive pain. So, simply put, you step on the Lego, and your foot with the touch receptors are going to realize pain. Okay. They're going to send that pain sensation via sensory neurons. We learned that in previous videos towards the central nervous system. Now, one thing to clarify, in the central nervous system, you are integrating. And remember, integration is the ability to process things. While you are integrating, it's not the brain here. What we're really focusing on is the spinal cord. So that's really what we're prioritizing. So the spinal cord is going to integrate using what's called interneurons and calculate what are we doing here, process it. It processes that pain and says, yep, this is not good. So it's going to send a message via the motor neurons. These motor neurons are going to go to, like, for example, the muscles, which are going to be considered effector organs, aka they create something, they cause something. And then your muscles are going to pull away from the Lego and examine, and you're going to examine, am I okay? That hurt. Pretty straightforward process. We can see what it looks like here in a different format. I think this picture is even better. It just shows, like, in an example that you, for some reason, palm a nail. The pain receptors are going to be sent via sensory neurons into the spinal cord. The interneurons are going to make sure to process that information and say, hey, what's going on? They're going to send information to the motor neurons and activate muscles to pull your hand away. Now, there are some examples of some reflexes that we need to know. Oh, I just realized this was a GIF. That's pretty wild. I didn't know that there was a GIF uploaded to the notes. So it almost caught me off guard there. But the patellar reflex and the pupillary reflex. You can actually see the pupillary reflex really well in this GIF. You see the pupil, which is the dead center of the eye, the black part of the eye, expanding and contracting. So the patellar reflex, let's actually move on to here. The patellar reflex is also known as the stretch reflex. The point of this, every single reflex has to have an evolutionary purpose. So the point of the patellar reflex is to test your quadriceps, the group of muscles found in the front of the thigh that we learned back in muscular system, right? So if the quadriceps are working properly, when you tap the patellar ligament, which is right below the kneecap, you should see the leg swing up. This is helpful for helping to maintain muscle tone, posture, and balance. The pupillary reflex That's stuff that we're going to learn when we do senses. But the long story short is that your pupils enlarge and dilate and shrink dependent on light. If there's too much light, they shrink because you don't want to damage the eye. Not enough light, and then they dilate, they expand because you need to be able to see more clearly. This can be useful for checking brainstem functionality, occipital lobe functionality, optic nerve functionality, and also if someone's under the influence of something. If they're on certain drugs, their eyes will stay dilated even if you shine a light into their eye. Last couple examples regarding reflexes. Flex or reflex. This is a common one. This is the one we were talking about with regards to the hot stove circumstance. But I also like to call this one the pain reflex. It's known as the withdrawal reflex as well. But the pain reflex is going to be a response to pain. Literally, painful stimulus, withdrawal of that body part away. That's common sense. The plantar reflex is interesting. To get the plantar reflex, imagine if this was your foot. It has to be barefoot, but you just use anything like a pen, and ideally the part of your pen that's not going to write on you, but you just draw down from the toes all the way to your toe or to your heel. If you go from the toes to your heel, what it should happen is your toes will curl. That curling process is called Babinski's sign. The point of that is to test. This is something that actually doctors do with infants. This is not something that you do like when you go to get a physical, but they do this to test to make sure that the motor cortex and the corticospinal tract are functioning, so parts of the brain. Now, why would this thing exist? Like, what's the point of the plantar reflex, like evolutionarily speaking? Well, think of our ancestors. Human, Homo sapien, we don't do this too much, although you probably do this from time to time, like in your bedroom, right? Where you pick up items with your foot, like socks and whatever. But our predecessors, animals or species that used to be more closely related to bonobos and chimps, they do this all the time. If you look at bonobos and chimps that exist today, they use their feet to pick up tools. So that's an easy relation to our previous ancestors, which is pretty cool, and that sticks around with us. And the last thing to mention, this is pretty common sense, but when you're doing something voluntary, by committing a voluntary action, more neurons and synapses are going to be involved, meaning it's a longer response. So even something like me pretending to write with this pen, that seems instant, right? There's no delay, but there are more neurons having to fire for that to occur than if I were to put my hand over the candle, like you see here, and then my hand be burning and in pain and jerking my hand away. Okay, so overall, pretty easy stuff regarding reflexes. Like I said, this unit can get a little bit more dense, especially with action potential, but I really hope you've been paying attention and sticking along, and hopefully there aren't any concerns with any of this stuff. So with that said, I appreciate you guys checking in. I'll see you guys in the next set of videos when we do nervous system part 2.